Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar, D365 FNSCM 10.0.48. Don't be blindsided. I'm Sebastian Anderson with the Licensing and Database Desk here at Avantiico. Joining us today is a distinguished panel of D365 experts, ready to share their insights on the 10.0.48 update and help you get ahead of what's coming. Director of Managed Services and Strategic Initiatives, Chris Barbera, will kick things off with an overview of the 2026 One Version Update cadence and Avantiico's Service Update Roadmap. D365 Finance Consultant and Director of Business Applications Consulting, Brandon Nash, will guide us through the finance section of today's show, including improved invoice processing, a unified compliance framework, tracking early payment discounts, and more. Next, Senior D365 Supply Chain Consultant, Michael Kavanaugh, will deliver the latest supply chain management updates and enhancements, such as flexible outbound buffer management, accurate serial and batch tracking, smarter container loading, and other topics. And finally, our indispensable project manager, Braden Short, will shine some light on the latest platform updates, like navigating directly to records in D365 from AI agents or Copilot responses, and how AI agents can help you read, create, modify, and delete D365 record attachments. Chris will be taking over shortly, but before we dive into today's session, I'd love to share some of the other exciting webinars and events we have coming up. Coming up on June 30th at 10 a.m. Pacific, join us for Dynamics 365 FNSCM licensing and security enforcement. We're well into 2026, and Microsoft's latest D365 licensing enforcement push is now in full swing. Time is running short, and because enforcement timelines are tied to each organization's contract renewal or anniversary date, staying ahead of this is critical. Join us to find out what's changing, how to pinpoint your organization's deadlines and obligations, and which steps to take right now to head off disruption. If you manage Dynamics licenses or have a hand in renewal decisions, this session will help you cut risk, keep costs in check, and protect uninterrupted D365 access for your team. We will have more events and webinars added to the calendar, so do be on the lookout for those, and be sure to let us know in the chat if there's anything you would really like to see from us in the future. All registration links for these events will be available in the chat, on our website, and within this slide deck. One last note. As we go through this presentation, do not hesitate to ask any questions you have in the chat. We will address them in the open Q&A at the tail end of the webinar or in direct email follow-up. And with that, Chris, take it away.
Excellent. Thanks, Sebastian. All right, let's go to the next slide here. I think we have the agenda slide up.
There we go. Should be moving through.
All right, next one. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I think we actually had some people from Australia sign up, so it's truly a global webinar for today. My name is Chris Barbera. I run managed services here at Avantiico. And again, as Sebastian mentioned, we're going to talk about the key features that are in Microsoft D365 Finance and Supply Chain for version 10.0.48, which is scheduled for release tomorrow. We do run these quarterly, so it's great to see some recurring attendees. There are 4 service updates a year, and we run this similar webinar series essentially a week or 2 before each of the service updates comes out. So please, if you're interested in getting this kind of information on a recurring basis, please sign up, and we'll make sure that you get invites for each one of these. Okay, so let's go back to the agenda slide for a moment. Just want to go over what we're going to talk through here today. Okay, there we go. So first I'm going to go through and talk about really what service updates are for people that are less familiar with the process. Talk through where we actually recommend you start and the recommended end date for this specific update. Also, we'll go through some opportunities if this gets kind of confusing, how we may be able to help you with helping with some of the service updates and kind of going through some of this. I'm also going to highlight one unique scenario that occurred for 10.0.47, the previous update, that could affect you guys as well. After that, our awesome team of consulting, Brandon's going to take over for finance, Mike will do supply chain, and Braden, you're going to talk about the platform updates. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Or next two.
Back to the meat of the show right here.
There we go. Okay, need to go tap one forward there so we'll get the full picture here. Great, so before we talk about what's specifically in 10.048, I want to educate you a bit on how Microsoft announces what's coming out in these updates. Microsoft publishes 2 wave releases every year that essentially give you a 6-month roadmap of what's coming out for D365, as well as many other applications in the Microsoft ecosystem. In these wave releases, the actual implementation of those announcements are in the service updates. In this example, we're talking about 48. So these wave releases are kind of the roadmap, and then the service updates are the ones that actually get it into your system. Microsoft has a great tool for seeing what's coming out in the future at aka.ms Release Planner, and this will give you highlights on all the different features that are coming out for the various applications. They're published dates for previewing them and when they should actually be in your system. Know that sometimes these dates are a little bit aspirational, where sometimes they slip a bit, but generally it's going to be in that sometime in that 6-month time frame that they actually come out, that they can be put into D365. Okay, so I encourage you to take a look at that. It's a great tool. You can even mark the ones you're interested in, and it'll keep you updated on the ones that are most important to you. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so what's in each one of these service updates? Well, there's really a few different areas. The first one is new features. So included in your subscription, you're going to get enhancements or new features to things that may already exist. But let's look in the past. For instance, financial tags has been added in the past few years. Subscription billing didn't exist when D365 first came out. But these great new features or enhancements are brought in, and they're included in your subscription price. So it's great to be able to take advantage of those features as they come out. The next one is platform updates. Think of this as not so much major feature changes, but UI improvements, AI improvements, optimizations. We have a few cool ones to talk about towards the end today. Regulatory updates. These are generally international localizations, but a few years back we had a change to the 1099 format, and that was included in one of the regulatory updates. So when you came in to do your 1099s in the January, February timeframe, the new forms were already available within D365. They also depreciate features. Typically, when they're removing these features, they're putting in something, an enhancement that's going to be better, improved it in some way. And usually we get about a year's notice before a feature is taken out, but not in every case. So we try to highlight those here as well. And then lastly, every software has bugs. Microsoft likes to call them quality updates, but of course, any bug fixes are brought in these service updates as well. Now, Microsoft does have another feature called proactive quality updates. So they can use that mechanism for getting more emergency updates in, priority fixes in between these major updates. And so just know there is a mechanism for Microsoft to do these more urgent updates for security and things like that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so did mention there are 4 service updates a year. If you're on D365, you're required to take at least 2, at least every other one. About half of our customers take every update, and about the other half take every other update. There's just a choice there. Getting every update allows you to get new features quicker. Your testing cycles between each update are shorter because you're testing fewer changes. On the other hand, taking every other update means you're disrupting your users, potentially their work, and be able to do testing less often, but they're having to test more things. So it's just kind of a trade up on which features and kind of life cycle you're looking for. If you're currently on 46, this version 48 will be mandatory for you to take. Okay. All right, next slide. Okay, so first let's look at this. I'm going to go through the Microsoft published timeline for 48. Now in this scenario, assume that 48 is a mandatory update for you, and you have the most optimal settings of Microsoft Lifecycle Services to give you the longest time possible before Microsoft automatically updates your system. So again, tomorrow it will be generally available. You see here in the blue. Microsoft has 2 auto update windows for 48. You can skip the first one. That will be on 7/11 and 7/18. But if this update is mandatory for you, this auto update will occur starting on 8/8 for your system if you do nothing. Now, again, we recommend you always plan these out in advance. You do not let an auto update occur. And this is kind of the dates we recommend. You should already be talking to your ISV partners to verify if there's any changes from them that you may need to implement with version 48. because it may change something with how their system works. So we're talking things like sksoft, FastPath, Blue Horseshoe, many of the other type of ISVs. DocCentric's a pretty popular one. So we recommend starting on 6/8 or slightly after that. That should be your earliest start date, and be completed in production by 7/25. Okay. You may notice that we're recommending 7/25, but the first auto update for you may be 8/8. We just have to go back and look a couple years when there was a CrowdStrike issue that took down a bunch of systems. Though it didn't take down D365, it did take down many other systems, and that was the weekend we were planning on many customers going to production. Had we gone right up against that window, we would have had a considerable problem because their system may have auto-updated that weekend while they were trying to scramble to fix many other issues due to the issues with systems going down during that CrowdStrike problem. So we always recommend to have that 2-week buffer. And for any of our customers on the call, you'll see as we're planning these out, nobody is later than 7/25 if this update is mandatory for you. Okay. One unique situation I want to mention here. If you are somehow on 46, if you're on 45, normally it would be impossible for you to need this update. But there was a unique scenario with 47 where Microsoft actually canceled the auto update. We've never seen this before because of an issue with number sequencing. So we actually have a customer that just joined us that is on 45 and now must take 48, and they cannot pause the first update window. So if you're in that unique situation where you're on 45 now, please reach out to us. We can help you with getting some idea on timing because you're not going to be able to even pause that first auto update window, at least what we've seen so far. So it's kind of a unique situation. Okay, on to this. If you want to do some research on 48 yourself, unfortunately, Microsoft kind of spreads it out all across Microsoft Learn. There are no less than 5 or 6 places you need to look. That's really why we do this webinar, because we curate down all these hundreds of updates down to what we think is most important, and then try to present that to you here today. Okay, all right, next slide here. Okay, lastly, I know we want to make sure we get into the great content on finance and supply chain and platform updates, but if any of this is confusing to you, you're not sure, do I have the right settings in LCS? I want to be able to plan out my service updates for the next year. I want to know when I need to take them. I want to be able to tell my user base when they're going to be testing. We can help out. If you just type it, write in a roadmap in the chat, we can reach out to you. There's no obligation. We'll work with you, look at your LCS environment, make sure it's set up optimally, look at what service updates are paused, and we'll put together a roadmap for you based on your particular needs for the next coming year for service updates. So if that's an interest, just type in roadmap and we'll help you out. Okay, on to the great content. Brandon, I think you're up first with finance.
Absolutely. We'll go ahead and hand this over to you, good sir, switching over to the first part of what's new.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for anyone where you are in the world. So again, my name is Brandon Nash. I'm the Director of Consulting Services here at Avantiico, and we'll be going through a number of the different finance updates and features that are available to us coming with the 10.0.48. So the first one that you see here has to do with the vendor ship from address. So there's going to be a new parameter in the vendor master record where you can have a mandatory or required field to have the ship from address on a vendor. So basically this is a new parameter that will show up on your vendors when you enable this feature that will require a ship from address on the vendor invoice. So this address represents basically what's called an establishment in the transaction, and I'll get into what establishments are in the next slide. But for this particular one, there's a parameter. This parameter now enforces the ability to have a ship from address that may be different than your vendor's primary address or a payment address or remit to address, and this address can now be stamped on the vendor invoice. And it's basically coming in because of a regulatory governance requirement that you may have for your vendor, where you need to have traction or visibility or auditability for your vendor's address on your invoices. So the typical use case would be something where there's a regulatory reporting required for your purchases or your invoices, or if you're the vendor for your customer and they need to have that information for you, this is where this parameter would come into play. And it works and coincides with the new parameter that I'm going to talk about, or the new features that I'm going to talk about in the next slide. But basically what you get here is you get an address that's now permanently stored on your invoice following when you create a purchase order or use any type of one of those functions when it comes to vendor invoicing. And so this can't be changed on that invoice after it gets posted. And basically you have a validation that has a mandatory registration category, if you will, that coincides with this invoice party record for your vendor invoice. And it helps with posting time. It reduces any potential risk that you could have if you had a non-compliant invoice that reaches the ledger that's associated with your vendor record. So this ship from address now gives you something that you can establish within the system, and that flows through your purchase orders onto your vendor invoice and meets any potential regulatory requirement that you may have when it comes to your vendors and tracking their registration IDs. Moving on to the next slide, that vendor address requirement that can now become available to you also coincides with what is called the establishment and registration of ID governance on invoices. So what this does is this establishment basically represents an operating unit within your legal entity. And your operating units, if you know about operating units and the organizational hierarchy and organizational purposes, is what gets tracked on your business events or your transactions in the system. And so these establishments may have regulatory requirements, like I just mentioned, when it comes to your vendor invoicing. And those regulatory requirements may be registration numbers that need to get tracked on your documentation. And so this helps enforce that within your system by automating some of this data onto your invoices. And the invoices can be for just about any invoice that gets created in your system. So whether we're talking free text invoices, sales invoices, vendor invoices, obviously, project invoice proposals, or even your general journals where you need to have an establishment associated with that, this tracks that for you. So now you have the ability to have the establishment connected to your operating unit, and your operating unit that could be used on a business transaction when you are identifying need to have the registration ID on an issued document like a customer invoice, or a receiving document like the vendor invoice that you would receive, and you have that regulatory representation when it comes to your registration ID. And so what we're going to show here now, I'm going to take over the screen share here in a minute, is show how that gets enforced on a vendor invoice when you have all the configurations in place, when you have your ship from address associated with your establishment, and you have registration IDs defined on your vendor that can now be enforced in your in your system. So let me take the screen share for a moment and talk you through what some of this stuff looks like in the system itself.
Go right ahead.
All right. I'm assuming everyone can see my screen. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my vendor list. So I have my vendors here, and we'll just use my vendor, this BNA vendor here directly. And I'll show you, just like on the screenshot there before, you have this required ship from on vendor invoice parameter. And you also have those parameters within the accounts payable parameters as well as accounts receivable parameters, where when you go into the parameters setting, you can then see under the invoicing area the two fields that I showed in the screenshot. So this is what you get when you enable those features in the system. Okay. So now let's go back to my vendor. I'm going to create a purchase order for this vendor. And you'll see that I have my invoice, my address associated with my invoice. So my invoicing address, which is slightly different than my payment address or my primary address for my vendor, for example. And so what you'll see here is you'll see when I create the lines associated with this, you'll see the ship from address come on, you'll see the establishment come on, and then I'll process the purchase order and invoice it so you can kind of see what happens and what happens when you have the parameters set up correctly and you have your system configured appropriately. So here you can see down in the address area on my line detail, I now have a ship from area and I have this establishment that's associated with it. So let's select an item. And we'll add our warehouse. So again, this is not a sales order or a purchase order like supply chain demonstration. So you're not going to necessarily see anything related to advanced warehousing or any automated functions like that. So I do want to just give you a preview of that. Okay, so here you can see all this information automatically populates in here. So it's slightly different in terms of the address that I would have as an invoice or a payment or a primary. And then you can see my finance, my finance establishment in here. So let me confirm this purchase order. And then again, once we confirm it, don't worry about this. This has to do with vendor collaboration, which we're not demonstrating here today. And forgive me on the demo system here, they tend to sometimes be a little slower than people would like to see, but that's the nature of live demonstrations. So let me process the product receipt.
We'll chalk the loading bars up to due diligence.
That's right. So now once this product receipt, what you're going to see when I start to process the invoice is you're going to see an error message come about. And the reason why that is because I have registration IDs set up for this vendor, but I don't have it set specifically for one of the for this address that I have in place, because I want to show you why and how that that enforcement occurs. Okay, so now let's go to our invoice. Okay, so you can see here on my setup area, right? Because it's not posted, I have my vendor ship from address, I have my address in here, and I have my establishment that's not editable. So once I come in here, I'm going to post my vendor invoice. And we can see that I've got a few error messages coming in here. And the message is saying that you don't have an applicable registration ID found for this invoice on the party roll for the type of registration category. And so this is the enforcement that you get in the system if you have these type of regulatory requirements for your vendors and or other scenarios that you may have in your business. So what we have to do is we have to be able to have this in place. And that's what I'm going to go back and show you very briefly. So here I can go to my vendor account. And I can go to over here under vendor and go to registration IDs. Now you would obviously have these in place automatically. So you can see I have two invoices. So I have a registration ID for my payment invoice, but I also need it for my invoice, for my payment address, but I also need it for my payment or my invoice address. So I'm going to select my registration type that it was telling me about. I'm going to give it a registration number here. So I have some data already predefined, and we'll give it a description. And we'll just say select section is West Coast, because that's where I live, and we have an issuing agency. So some of these fields are required, or like the registration number is required. The other ones are optional. But the key is that once you have these in place and you have them associated with your appropriate addresses, now you can go in and you can process your transactions. So now let me go back to my purchase order for my vendors.
Licensed music not included with the solution.
Of course not. course not. Go over to my pending vendor invoices because I didn't take note of that. There we go. So now I can come to this particular invoice and I can click post, and now it can get posted. And so again, just going back to the fact that we have some regulatory requirement for our vendor invoice, we have a ship from address that is available that we can now demonstrate or that we can now display on our invoice. And then we would have our registration IDs associated with our system. And now we have a completed posted invoice. So when you have those things in place, that enforcement is now available to you, and you have true regulatory compliance with these registration IDs that can be associated with your invoices that are tied to your vendors and the different addresses that you may have when it comes to shipping from the vendor address. And again, the regulatory registration IDs can also be applicable to customer and or project records if you have those type of requirements on those as well. So now let's go back to the presentation to talk about the next feature that is available to us. I'll stop sharing here, or Sebastian will take over the screen share. And we have a new thing that's available to us in the purchase order year-end inquiry. So now this feature is a cool feature that you have within your budgeting module if you're using purchase order year-end functionality. And the reason why this is a cool feature is because it kind of brings the PO year-end process full circle. In February 2025, Microsoft introduced the non-retrievable purchase order page to the PO year-end process, so users could see why purchase orders were not included in their PO year-end process. And now this feature actually gives you visibility into the purchase orders that were processed during that PO year-end process that you may have had. So from using the purchase order year-end process, you now have a form that shows you your non-retrieved purchase orders and why they were not retrieved. And when your process gets completed, now you have visibility into see which purchase orders were actually included in your year-end process. So now you have end-to-end visibility when it comes to your purchase order year-end process when using, budgeting control within the system. And you have a reliable, dedicated inquiry page with the detailed information for your controllers and auditors within the organization. So this is a cool feature that I really liked because I spend a lot of time in the budgeting modules. I work with the purchase order year-end processes. And so when you have that visibility, it becomes very important to be able to see exactly where the purchase orders are and how they ended up getting moved over to your PO year-end process, to your next year's process. Let's move on to the next one. So the next one has to do with our advanced bank reconciliation functions within D365. So here now there's a cash discount support is now available for your customer invoice matching function in D365 using the advanced bank rec matching rules. So in this particular scenario, you now have the ability to apply a cash discount, and that allows that to be taken into consideration if your customers take their cash discounts, when they have invoices that are due to you. It reduces a step to manually create a transaction for the discounted amount when you have to do your bank reconciliation through the advanced bank rec feature. Obviously, it improves matching accuracy because now when your customer takes that amount, let's say your customer has an invoice of $100 and they get a cash discount because they pay it early of $20. Well, if they pay you that $80, instead of you having to manually create the $20 difference as a transaction, you can now have that taken into account in your actual bank statement that comes through in the system. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate for you here right now. So bear with me here while I get my system prepped, and I'll take control of the screen share in just a moment here, Sebastian. So just bear with me.
Sounds good. The button is ready when you are.
Thank you. All right, so let's go here. Bear with me. Let's go to my other area. Okay, let me go back into the meeting. I had it set up and then the system closed on me, so I had to reset some things here.
That happens to the best of us.
Okay, all right, so let's get this bar out of the way. So here, I'm going to go to my customers view. And as you can see here, so my customer, I have this designer department stores. Let's go to their transactions. And let's load the latest invoice that I have. So I have an invoice here that's due for $3,187. And I have my matching rules set up so that it has that apply cash discount associated with it. So now we have that in place for our customer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just upload a vendor bank statement and get that into the system. And I have to go this way. So bear with me here. Let me go to my bank statements area. So let's drag this. So I have a bank statement here that would normally come in through an SFTP server that I would have automatically set up, and it would come in here. So now I'm going to import my bank statement. So if I go into the bank module in D365 and come into bank statements, I can use my import function. And if you've seen any of my previous webinars about bank reconciliation, you know this whole process can be automated. So, and I would normally have this set to reconcile after import, so I wouldn't have to do the matching by myself, but I'm show you this instead, so that way you can kind of see how it works and how it gets applied. So I'm going to click OK. And we should get this bank statement that I just uploaded into the SharePoint site and have that imported into here. And we should have bank statement number 6 come in just a moment. So just bear with it here. This is the first import that's happening for the day. So if you're used to working with testing and dev environments, you know, when an import or report is being generated for the first time, it can be a little slow, as you've seen. So here we have our opening balance. We have statement number 6. Got my statement ID. I've got my transaction in here. And that amount is not correct. And I thought I changed that payment amount. So that's not good. Bear with me here. Let me see if I can fix that very quickly. That did not work out like I expected. Bear with me here. Let me redo that. Let's go ahead and delete this and say yes.
We like to show you the real deal here, not just screenshots of how things are supposed to work. So you know we're really doing it.
Yeah. So my apologies, you guys. I changed one amount and didn't change the other, and that's kind of what happens sometimes when you're working with these live transactions. But we'll get this fixed up in no time.
One text box definitely looks a lot like the others.
Yeah.
Just a note here, I did see we have at least one question in the chat. We'll since it's a question that Brandon will have to answer, we won't be able to do it in real time, but we will get to it as we get to the end here. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah. Okay, let me re-import this guy and get this squared away for you. My apologies again, guys, but those kind of things happen sometimes when you're trying to make sure all things are prepped.
We know a guy called Murphy, and he's got a little law that we all follow from time to time.
Yes. Well, these are all brand new features, so that's why we kind of go through this, and so you guys won't have to.
Okay, so as you can see here, I just had to update that to show that this amount was matching. So this is basically my cash discount amount that my customer has voluntarily taken because it's owed to them based on the invoice amount that they had. So we can validate this, and then we can confirm this statement. Once the statement gets confirmed, you can see that we have a line that's unmatched, so we can reconcile in the worksheet. I'll create new. Creates the new worksheet for me, has my updated ending balance and the total amount. So now when I go into the worksheet, normally, again, when you have the reconcile after import and you already have all of your advanced or your matching rules already set up, you can have this do this without you having to come in here and manually watch it. But this is part of the demonstration, right? So now I want to run my matching rule because you can see I have the amount. I have no amount in my actual bank transactions. I just have my bank statement transaction that is shown here, and that's what's available to me, right? and this is how it comes in. So if I select this, I obviously don't have anything to match against it, and that's where our matching rule that applies our cash discount is also available to us. So this particular matching rule has that set up like you saw in the screenshot in the presentation. So now I can click OK. And we'll let this happen in real time. And so what you're going to see here is you're going to see this transaction go from the unmatched transactions area to the matched transactions area. And now that when it gets matched, the system has actually created the payment journal for me, and it has settled the invoice, and it has came in and taken into account the cash discount value. So we'll let that kind of finish processing here. It's taking a little longer than I expected, because that's why I tried to run it one by one rule instead of running the whole matching rule set. But you can see matching rule is executed. Message detail shows me that a customer payment journal was created. As I noted, the unmatched transaction, the transaction is removed from this area and it's moved into here. So we have a payment journal that the system has created, and it has also applied this payment journal to the system. So now I can go ahead and mark this as reconciled. But what's most important also is what happens in the background when it comes to this view here. So my invoice that was open for $31.87, cash discount was taken into account. So the system recognizes that this customer's invoice had a cash discount associated with it because it was paid on time. And it has the payment created to generate the actual settlement. So now this is all complete. So now imagine if you have this for multiple customers and you're doing your daily advanced bank reconciliation, and you have this process automated without me walking you through these steps. Now you have an end-to-end clean process that can match your vendor transactions, it can match your customer transactions, but it can also match your cash discount transactions that are associated with those invoice settlements. So now I can come in here and I can mark this as reconciled and be done with that process. So that's the cash and bank new feature that's available to you if you're using the advanced bank reconciliation in D365, which I highly recommend if it fits your business process. All right, let me give it back to Sebastian so he can show you guys the next slide, which has to do with a free text invoice. Now, this is not anything where you have to enable feature management to get the setting to show up. This is a configuration that is already built into the system if you are using the default descriptions within D365. So you have default descriptions in D365 and they are associated with your specific transactions. Well, what these give you now is this gives you the ability to be able to have the financial tags that are associated with your transactions and have those be applied to your descriptions on a free text invoice. So now if you have multiple lines on your free text invoice and you have to have descriptions associated with those free text invoices, you now have the ability, if you use your default descriptions within the system, to have those descriptions associated with every single line within your free text invoice without you having to manually enter them for every line. You enter them one time on the header and then they show up on all lines associated with it, as long as it's associated with the customer invoice. So I'm going to take the screen share and kind of show you what this looks like, so that way you have a good understanding of how the system is can do this automatically for you without you necessarily having to enable a feature or change your current configurations. So let's go and do one more time, taking the screen share, and talk to you through how these financial tags can play into your free text invoicing. Okay. So again, it starts with the configurations of your default descriptions. So your default descriptions come in here into the organization administration module under setup, and you have your customer invoice ledger and you have customer invoice for customer. So you have to take into account that this is only going to apply to the posting of the transaction on your customer transactions list, not in your ledger. And so this is very important for you to be able to understand, especially if you use financial tags in your system. So as you can see here, I have for my ledger piece, I have my financial tags. This is a new feature. This is part of this new capability. And I have my customer free text invoice customer reference field that I want to populate. And I have the same thing for my customer invoice posting, but I have a different value for the invoice. I'm using the invoice number instead of the reference. So I want you to really pay close attention to how this gets set up, because now when I come in here, and let's go to my free text invoices in the AR module. And I'll create a new invoice for my customer here that I have been testing with. Let's go to the header. So here you can see I have my financial tags. So we'll just use this number 863 in here, and we'll just use web demo for our other financial tag, and we'll call this, webinar 48. Okay. And I'm going to use the reference number here, and we'll call this 10.48 web. Okay. So now when I go to my lines, I have my lines in here. Oops. Let's get the value in there. And we'll do this for $2,500. So you can see my financial tags that are now available to me. These come and populate automatically. So now if I add a new line, and let's say I add another revenue account, we call that 3,500. So there's no manual entry of these financial tags because they automatically come in here. So now when I post this, what this is giving me now is it's giving me the ability to have these descriptions. So there's consistency and accuracy across all my lines that match up to what's in my customer transactions within the system. So I don't necessarily have to worry about having a generic. If you know that if you don't use the financial tags, or you're only using a default description, and you have certain limitations in terms of the fields that are available to you, then you know that all that shows up is the free text invoice or the fields that are in the system. Whereas now when you have financial tags, you have an additional visibility when you look at those customer transactions, and you can see your customer transactions for that 6,000. Now I can see my financial tag details that I posted in here automatically. But when I say you have the two different settings for the customer invoice transactions, which you're seeing here, versus the actual voucher details that show up in the ledger. Oh, let's go here. Let's get this updated. Get our voucher in here. So now you can see, right, it just brought in my customer invoice, but it didn't bring in my financial tag. So even though the financial tags can be considered configured on the ledger, they don't really show up like that in the ledger side. They just show up on the customer side. So that's just something for you to be mindful of if you're going to use this feature and you're going to use the default descriptions for your financial tags going forward. Okay. All right, let me stop sharing and go back to the presentations where that's it in terms of demonstrations. A couple of other new features that are going to be available to us. A couple of highlighted things that I want to just call out is, in cash and bank management, you've got some automatic clearing of centralized vendor payments. So this helps automatically clear those bridge transactions when you're using the advanced bank reconciliation process and you're using bridge transactions in the system. There's a couple of new features there associated with the general ledger that you can see applies to data maintenance. So if you're going to be using the general ledger and you need to make sure that you clean up data, we have some functionality there that's going to be coming out with this new feature or this new set of features. Electronic reporting now has the ability to have a blind carbon copy when you're sending out your reports. So now instead of just a to and a CC, you can also BCC any users that need it. And then subscription billing, majority of these are in preview mode. So take caution, obviously, when you're testing, but you can see that there's some capabilities in terms of the automatic reposting when it comes to the capability for unbilled revenue. You have better accuracy for your MEA credit notes or your multiple element arrangement credit notes, and some improved batch processing that's available to you. So a number of different finance features. I hope these were insightful for you in terms of what they can do. Please do your thing when it comes to testing. And if you have any questions, want to see how configurations are set up, you can please reach out to me directly or Chris and our managed services team, and we'll be excited and happy to help you with your transformation and updates going to 10.48. So Sebastian, with that, I'll give it back over to you to hand to Michael.
Sounds good. We will hand this over now to the supply chain side of our presentation and the one and only Michael Kavanaugh. Michael, please take it from here.
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Today we'll be going through all the supply chain updates for 10.48. So the first one that we have here is the keep supply for confirmed demand and planning optimization feature. So on our master plans, there is now going to be a new parameter there that you see on the screenshot there that says keep supply for confirmed demand. Now, what this is intended to do, this is primarily meant to support capable to promise order promising. For those that are familiar with that, that's one of our delivery date methods that D365 gives us as an option. And what it does is it actually runs a small version of planning optimization or master planning, if you will, when a sales order is entered. And it determines when you can actually deliver the sales order based on capacity constraints, material constraints, etc. Everything that master planning does. And this has been around for a while. So capable of promise has been around for a while. But what this does is it says, okay, if I then run my master plan, I'm going to make sure any planned orders that were created from that mini run of planning optimization are maintained and aren't recreated. So anything pegged to these confirmed lines through CTP or through other methods are maintained when you run master planning. So again, the intent here is when you're running CTP, the system's creating these planned orders, and as long as that sales order line has a confirmed ship date associated to it, and this parameter is enabled, the system will keep those. So let me share my screen just for a second here. I'm not going to show a whole lot here, but just kind of want to show you where these interactions come up. So what you're seeing right now, you're seeing a master planning workspace in D365. And what I have here is I have an item A001, our famous HDMI cable, that is associated to a sales order that has a confirmed ship date associated to it. Now, in this case, I didn't actually run CTP. I just put in a confirmed ship date against my sales order that this purchase order is fulfilling. But if I was to rerun planning right now, the system would maintain this planned order. It would not recreate this planned order. And I just ran one earlier during the session today and confirmed again that it keeps this planned order. It doesn't change anything. So anything associated to these confirmed ship date lines, it will maintain. Now, with that parameter enabled on the master plan, you'll also to actually manually run a plan as well. So if I run it in batch, it keeps that parameter. But if I manually run it, I now have this parameter that gets passed down from the plan to keep it or not. So I can actually control it when I run individual runs as well. So that's that first feature. Let me pass it back here, and we'll move on to the second one.
All right, popping up here in just a moment.
Soft issue margins. So this actually has to do with master planning as well. On your coverage group, you have some margins that you can apply that master planning considers when it runs. So you have things like issue margins or receipt margins, or you see reorder margins right above that as well. And those are additional days that the system needs to plan around to process any of those type of activities. So receipt is receiving something in, issuing it is picking it, or what have you. So in the case of issue margins, they now give us the option to determine that the issue margin is a soft issue. And that means if it's going to delay by having that issue margin, if it's going to delay any orders, I don't need to take the full issue margin. So let's take an example where I have an issue margin in the system of let's say 2 days. And I have that in place because maybe I want master planning to schedule production orders or bring things in an additional 2 days earlier before I actually issue the material out on a sales order. That would be the picking on the sales order. So master planning, a lot of people will do this to get a buffer to make sure planning will create these orders, let's say 2 days ahead of time. Now, if that's going to delay the delivery of that sales order, today it's going to tell you that. It's going to say, hey, well, I'm going to place this order to fulfill the sales order, but you're now going to be delayed a day or two because of this issue margin. So with soft issue margins on, the system says, well, we're basically assuming those issue margins are flexible and that if it's going to delay something, we can actually move quicker. So if it's going to delay it, it shrinks the issue margin. So I did a very extreme example here where the coverage group on this item, so actually let me share my screen. I'm going to go look at the same planned order here, the same item. So on this item here, I set an issue margin of 20 days. So something extreme. But I reran planning, and normally what would happen here is it'd say, well, this is going to be delayed. It's going to delay the sales order. But here it doesn't actually say that because it says it takes that issue margin and shrinks it down to as far as it can without actually delaying the order. So with that soft issue margin, gives us a little bit more flexibility there. That's just a nice feature that D365 has added in this most recent release. And I will pass it back. And you can move on to the next one. All right, the procurement agent. So this is one of our AI Copilot agents that actually has been around, let's say, for about 1.5 years at this point. There was a number of procurement agents that kind of came out at the beginning of 2025 that we've actually done some demos on in the past. But we wanted to bring these back up because they are now production ready. So one of these agents is the impact analysis agent. So to show you what this is, let me go ahead and share my screen. And what you're seeing right now is one of the places that you can review the results of this agent. And what it's doing is it can review emails from vendors, or it can also take into account changes that are made through the vendor collaboration portal. So both ways that vendors are communicating changes to you based on your delivery dates or quantities on your POs. So when they make those changes, the system can then run an impact analysis to say, well, they're trying to make a change here. How is this going to impact my operations downstream? So this workspace here shows you that. This one's based around the emails. So what it did is it's taking a look at emails that were sent to a specific address or specific account. It's analyzing those. It's reading through the emails and saying, hey, the vendor here is saying that purchase order, in this case, purchase order 1100 is going to be delayed to 615. And down here we actually have the text of the email. So here we said we're going to delay this to 615. The system sees that. It says, okay, this is going to be delayed to 16. What's the impact downstream? In this case, there's no impact, but it did run that analysis. If there would have been impact, it would actually show you that. You could actually dig into that and see, if that is impacting production orders, which then impact sales orders. So this impact analysis is now production ready for us to use. Now, I will also mention this isn't the only place you can see it as well. You can actually see it directly from the POs themselves. You can actually now run simulations as well. From the PO, you can actually go, there's a simulate button. Actually, I'll show you. I'm not going to run one right now just because it does take a little bit of time because it's kind of doing an explosion. It's running like a mini version of master planning to determine what's the impact downstream of this. But if I was to look at a PO here, you now have this impact simulation here where you can say, hey, I'm going to simulate changes, and you can actually change dates and then it'll run the same impact. So this is a way you can simulate it. So that's now production ready, as well as those other agents that are scanning emails and presenting you with those changes as well. Okay, I will pass it back.
Perfect. We will pop back on over to the slides, going into the next detail.
Yeah, so this one, I'm actually not going to demo this one, but I'll talk through this one right now. I did do some testing on this. So this has to do with cluster picking. So for anyone who has used cluster picking in D365, the way that it works is it's going to take a cluster of work, and you can either build that cluster, or you can have the system assign it as well, and it takes multiple pieces of work, and it allows the worker to go pick them all at once using locations on a cart or however they want to separate that inventory. Now, anytime you were picking batch numbers or serial tracked items, the system would ask for it ahead of time. It would say, okay, let's say I have 20 to pick for multiple different orders. It's going to ask you ahead of time, and it's going to say, okay, which batch number are you picking right now? And let's say I have 20 of a certain batch, so I put the batch number in there, and then it says, okay, cool, now put these in the different locations. They now give you some additional control here where they allow you to, when batch numbers are used or serial numbers are used, to actually pick by position rather than the entire pick. And the reason you might want to do that is you might want to really be sure that that batch number is going into each of those positions, each of those locations. So if I had an example here where I'm picking for 2 different orders, let's say, and I need 10 in one position, 10 in another position, and I go to the location to pick this batch tracked item, originally it was just going to ask me the batch number for the 20 and say, go pick 20, and here's where you put 10 and 10. Now it's going to split it up to an individual pick of 10, have me scan the batch number, tell me exactly what position it goes into, so there's not multiple positions, just one, and then it'll have me do the same thing for the next position. So it's just a way to be a little bit more careful with your batch tracked items and serial tracked items if you want some additional controls there. So we just wanted to call that out, that they're making some improvements, or at least offering some additional options for cluster picking. There hasn't actually been a whole lot of improvement around this area for a while. So it's nice that they're pushing some new functionality out to us on this. All right, we can move on to the next one. Product lifecycle state policies. So when engineering change management came out, or ECM for short, one of the very nice features that it offered with it is that it offered more granular control of where that item is used within certain modules or certain areas of the system. Prior or without engineering change management, the product lifecycle state had pretty limited functionality. It basically said, is the item available for planning? Is it going to be, is it included in master planning based on the lifecycle state? And that was really all the control that you had. But with engineering change management, it gave you all these additional options that you kind of see in the screenshot there, where you see all these different business processes where you can say it's blocked for this or enabled for this, and you can configure that by lifecycle state. But you had to use ECM for that, which is like version control, things along those lines. Now, with this new feature, you don't have to have ECM enabled for an item to be able to use those additional that additional functionality to be restricted by process. Now here, I can't show it just because once you've enabled ECM in your system, it doesn't let you enable this feature. So if you don't have ECM, you can now enable this feature and say, okay, I want to have this additional functionality on my product lifecycle state. So that's what's become available in 1048. So I think this is going to be one that a lot of people have interest in. One of the most common requests is like, how do I block an item from sales order entry? This is going to be the easiest way to do it because you have a process there that we can say, hey, it's enabled with warning or it's blocked for that, and it will block it. Okay, we can move on to the next one. Optimize 3D packing containerization. So this is one we wanted to call out. What this does is, you see on the screenshot there, when you're building your container build templates in D365. So when D365 is doing containerization for you, so it can basically build containers and say, hey, based on this item and how big it is, here's how many that can fit in these different types of containers, and it can choose the proper container to use when going through the packing process. The problem that it had with it is it wasn't very smart in the way that it kind of did it. It would use the volume of the item and say, hey, based on the volume of the item, here's how many can fit in there. But it didn't really consider the true, aspects of that in length, width, depth to see if it could actually fit in these spots. Is it actually realistic, or is it was just using volume? So now there's an optimized 3D packing strategy that does actually have an algorithm behind it that is more accurate when determining whether an item and how many of an item can fit within a container. So it will better choose those container types for you during the process and associate the correct amount of items to those containers that can actually fit in there. Now, it's still not perfect, but it's much more accurate than it used to be when it was just based on volume and actually wasn't considering those other dimensions. Okay, let's move on to the next. All right, so those are the main features that we wanted to walk through. But again, there's some other features maybe to call out here. We were talking about CTP earlier, capable to promise with our order promising. There's some additional functionality that's pushing out with that, where if you make changes to anything that would impact transport days, whether I change a mode of delivery, I change from truck to air, or things like that, the system has a better way of recalculating those dates. So that's that feature at the top there. The automatic dynamic work classification. For those of you that saw our presentation on 1047, occurred at our Dynamics Day, presented on that as a preview feature. It is now production ready, so that's that one there. And then there's some additional quality management improvements. Pushing out a lot of stuff regarding quality management over the last, let's say, 5 enhancements or 4 to 5 updates. It's been a big push of theirs to kind of get everything pushed out, so some additional changes there to improve those processes. And I think that's all we need to really go through. So I think that's good. There was not a ton of features in this release, but there were some nice ones. So I think some of those that I went through might be of interest to you. If they are, you can reach out to us. They are now available on 48. We can help you implement those or answer any questions about those. I'll pass it
Sounds
to you.
great. And yeah, absolutely. Please do feel free to leave those questions in the comment section here if you have a couple. In the meantime, we will be moving on to the platform highlights section of the show, and Braden will be talking us through the vital details. So, good sir, take it away.
Alrighty. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Moving into the platform updates for 10.048. These two updates that are important to note relate to AI in the model context protocol. If you do not know what that is, we did discuss this during our past webinar. You can catch that on our YouTube, or feel free to reach out and we'll go into depth of what the MCP is for D365. But with that being said, this first one is about deep links in the ERP MCP server, and it is a preview feature. So to set the stage, if you're using an AI agent or Copilot experience that is connected to D365, up until now, the agent could retrieve and work with your data, but getting back into the actual forms and detailed pages to review the information was something that you still had to manually navigate to. So with this change, whenever you're discussing with the agent anything related to a record, it will drop you a deep link that brings you directly back to that record. If you're talking about multiple records, it will bring you back to a table with a filtered view that will only bring back relevant information. So this information is super helpful, as it's going to be something that's going to help with context in your D365 experience, and it's also going to speed up record access. All right, and next slide, please. And then this next one builds directly on the MCP capability as well. So this one now allows attachment support for D365 and the MCP. So as I just said previously, you could only read and work with record data in the chat, but document attachments were off limits. With this feature, agents can now read, create, modify, and delete attachment records in the environment for you. To think about what this unlocks practically, an agent can now attach a supporting document to a vendor invoice, a purchase order, or a quality order, all a part of an automated workflow, without the user even having to open up the form, navigate to the document attachments page, and then uploading the attachment. There's also a companion enhancement that ships alongside this, which is worth calling out. The maximum response payload size jumps from around 160 kilobytes to 5 megabytes. So you're now able to upload multiple page PDF files or whatever have it without running into any kind of upload limitations. Both of these features are going to enhance the MCP capabilities. Chris did add some context to that here in the chat. And we're looking forward to future enhancements that will likely come with 10.049 and future releases that will continue to build on this functionality. With that being said, those are the only two platform updates that are to be noted during this time. I'll pass it back to Sebastian for next steps on the remainder of the presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Braden. And yeah, this very much is the tail end of the webinar. This is a good time to ask any questions that you might have in the chat, or get your thoughts together for an email to send to us later. And as is traditional around these parts, I will let Chris round out the presentation itself.
Thank you, Sebastian. One thing we would love to hear from you in terms of any feedback or topics you would like to see webinars on. We always are putting together new webinar topics and new presentations. We want to make sure we are tailoring these to the community and giving you the information that is most helpful for you. So if there's any topics, licensing, more about MCP, about the AI agents and capability within D365, more about what are the topics you saw and one of the that we kind of previewed here for 48. We'd love to hear from you so we can get a lot of good content out that you're interested in seeing. Again, we're also would love to hear and answer any questions you might have. If you want to come off mute, we're happy to do that, or you can put it in the chat. And again, if anybody's interested in having their roadmap placed out for the next year on what you need to do for service updates, or about how to configure your LCS environment for optimal service updates, just let us know. We're happy to help. Okay.
Fantastic. I think that just about covers everything today. So on that note, we will all happily say thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, rest of your week, and feel free to let us know if there are any other questions or concerns you'd like us to help with. Thanks again.